My only friend was a skeleton on the porch, and he took care of my dad. The last real thing my father ever bought was a bottle of cheap whiskey the night he found his replacement. He was a monster long before a skeleton wore his skin. The house lived under the weight of his footsteps. The floorboards groaned when he came home. The air soured with the smell of sweat and booze. My mother moved through the rooms like a ghost, her face a pale mask, her hands always twisting a dish rag. The only sounds were the clink of his bottle against the table, the murmur of the television, and the sudden, sharp crack of his voice. I spent most of my time making myself small. My room was my fortress. The space under my bed, my castle. From there, the vibrations of his yelling were just a dull thrum in my bones. I'd dream of leaving, of just walking out the door and never looking back. But then I'd hear my mother's quiet sob, a sound like a leaking faucet in the dead of night, and I couldn't leave her there alone with him. Then came October. The air grew teeth and the trees started to bleed color. My father, in one of his rare, non-threatening moods, decided the house needed Halloween decorations. He didn't buy any. Of course not. That would cost money he'd rather drink. He found it. That's what he said. He stumbled in one night, reeking, dragging it behind him. He'd found it on the side of Old Route 9, propped against the dead oak tree like it was waiting for a bus. A full human skeleton. It was tall, taller than him, a good 6'5". It was the color of old paper, yellow and stained. There were cracks spiderwebbing across its ribs, and a few teeth were missing from its wide, permanent grin. He laughed, a booming, ugly sound, and hauled it onto the porch bench. The dry bones made a hollow clatter against the wood. He stood there admiring his prize, his free decoration, then went inside to finish his bottle. The yelling started soon after. Something about the curtains. I slipped out the front door and sat on the bench. The skeleton sat beside me, its empty eyes staring out into the dark street. It was quiet out here. I started talking, just whispers at first. I told it about my father, about the noise, about the feeling of being a bug he was always about to crush. I vented everything, all the poison I held inside. It just sat there, listening. It was the best conversation I'd had in years. I started calling him Bones. Bones became my entire world. Every day after school, I'd sit with him. I'd sweep the dead leaves off his lap. When the sky threatened rain, I'd find an old tarp in the garage and cover his shoulders. He was my friend, my silent, stoic, bony friend. One afternoon, I was polishing his skull with the sleeve of my shirt, trying to make the yellowed bone gleam in the autumn light. I heard a faint sound, a soft, rhythmic clicking. I froze. It sounded like teeth, chattering softly. I looked around. The wind was rustling the leaves. It was just the wind. It had to be the wind, pushing a loose branch against the house. But the sound had seemed so close, right from his mouth. Life inside got worse. The pressure in the house was building, a storm gathering behind the walls. One night at dinner, my hand shook and my glass of milk slipped. It shattered on the linoleum floor, a splash of white in a spray of glass. My father's chair scraped back. He was on his feet, his face turning that deep, mottled red. He raised his hand. Crack. The sound came from the porch. It wasn't a thump. It was sharp, loud, like a heavy branch snapping in half. We all froze. My father's hand hung in the air. My mother stared at the front door, her eyes wide. Silence. "What the hell was that?" my father growled. He stalked to the door and threw it open. The porch was empty except for the skeleton, sitting on its bench, grinning its empty grin into the night. He grumbled something about a raccoon and slammed the door shut, the rage of the moment broken. He didn't hit me that night. The noises didn't stop. Right against the siding below my bedroom window. My father started leaving the porch light on all night. He started drinking more, but he got quiet. I'd see him standing in the dark living room just staring through the blinds at the figure on the bench. He wasn't sleeping. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands twitchy. The breaking point was a storm. Rain lashed the windows and wind howled like a dying animal. I was in my bed when I heard the garage door rumble open. I crept to my window and saw him. He was marching across the wet lawn with the sledgehammer from the back of his truck. His face was a mask of pure hate. He stalked onto the porch and raised the hammer. I wanted to scream, to tell him to stop, but the sound was stuck in my throat. The first blow landed on the skeleton's skull. It wasn't a crack, but a dull, wet crunch. He brought the hammer down again, and again. On its chest, its legs, its arms, he shattered it. He reduced my only friend to a pile of splinters and shards. He scooped the mess into a heavy-duty trash bag, threw it in the bed of his truck, and drove off into the storm, tires squealing on the wet asphalt. I collapsed back into bed and cried. A deep, ugly, silent cry for the broken pile of bones that was the only thing I had. The next morning, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I crept downstairs. The air didn't feel heavy. My father was in the kitchen. He was humming. He turned from the stove, a spatula in his hand, and smiled at me. It was a strange, clumsy smile. "Morning, Jory," he said. His voice was different, softer, less gravel. My mother sat at the table, looking dazed. She looked like someone who had been holding her breath for a decade and had just let it out. I walked past him to look out the window over the sink, and my heart stopped. He was there. Bones was sitting on the porch bench. He wasn't a pile of shards. He was whole. Perfect. He looked cleaner, whiter. Not a single crack on him. My father changed. The yelling stopped. The heavy footsteps vanished. He became kind. One afternoon, I dropped a plate, and instead of a backhand, he just knelt and helped me pick up the pieces, his voice a low murmur about being careful. My mother started smiling again, real smiles that reached her eyes. But he was wrong. Something was deeply, horribly wrong. He moved with a strange stiffness, like a puppet learning to walk. His knees would buckle at odd times. I saw him once, in the reflection of the TV, push at the skin on his face, pressing it back up as if it were sliding off. And his eating. He didn't chew. He just opened his jaw, wide and slack, and pushed the food in with his fork. The sounds were soft and wet. Halloween night came. The air was cold and smelled of wood smoke. I stood at the living room window, looking out at Bones on his bench. The porch light cast long shadows. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since he'd come back, and I saw it. On his left forearm, just below the elbow, was a small, gnarled lump of bone, a little knot on the otherwise smooth surface. A memory surfaced, cold and sharp. My father, years ago, in a rare good mood, telling me a story about falling out of a tree when he was a kid. How he broke his arm. He'd rolled up his sleeve and let me feel it. The hard little lump where the bone hadn't set right. A wave of ice washed through me. My blood turned to slush. I turned from the window. My father was standing in the doorway to the kitchen, watching me. He was smiling that loose, unnatural smile. He looked at me, and he gave me a slow, deliberate wink. His eyelid didn't close. It folded. It collapsed in on itself like a piece of wet paper. And for a split second, before the skin flopped back into place, I saw what was underneath. Not an eye, just a perfect, black, empty socket.